Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're really getting into some ideas that might make you look at money a bit differently.
Yeah, definitely.
A listener sent us some stuff from Robert Kiyosaki's book, Second Chance. And, well, it's known for shaking things up, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He really challenges that conventional financial thinking.
Like that whole, your house is not an asset line, and savers are losers. Pretty provocative.
It is. And our mission today is basically to unpack those ideas, figure out the core insights from Kiyosaki's viewpoint on wealth and, the whole financial system.
Right. And it's interesting how the book itself had a rocky start, wasn't it? Like
Yeah,
major publishers initially turned it down because of those core ideas.
exactly. That really tells you something about how much he was pushing against the grain, challenging what everyone sort of accepted as fact.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The first big one. The rich don't work for money. That sounds, well, it goes against everything most of us are taught, right?
Right.
Time equals money.
It really does. But the central idea here is making a shift, moving away from just earning a paycheck for your time
Mm-hmm.
towards building things, assets that generate income more passively. He even quotes Buckminster Fuller, who had this line about wealth being stolen via the money we work for.
Stolen. Wow. Okay, how? What's he getting at there?
Well, the idea is that if you're just relying on a job, you're kind of vulnerable to these pressures that chip away at your wealth.
What kind of pressures? Like taxes?
Exactly. Taxes, debt is a big one, and inflation. Kiyosaki argues these things constantly drain your earnings when a paycheck is your main source. The the truly wealthy, they focus on creating income streams that aren't directly tied to the hours they put in.
So it's not about being lazy then. It's about building something that generates money for you.
Precisely. You got it. And that leads him to talk about these like two types of rich.
Okay.
Yeah, he differentiates between the, let's say, truly rich, the top 1%, who've seen massive income growth, and then the high income rich.
Like doctors, lawyers, athletes,
Mhm.
people earning a lot, but still from a job.
Exactly. They still rely on that job.
Well,
The key difference he points out is the asset rich.
Yeah.
These are the people whose wealth comes from what they own, not just their salary.
right, ownership, that makes sense. Now, he also mentions that millionaire next door idea, from the 90s, average folks getting rich, saving, buying houses. How does he see that now, post 9/11 especially?
Ah, yeah, the millionaire next door. That painted this picture, didn't it? Go to school, get a good job, save diligently, invest in your house, the stock market. The American dream formula back then.
It worked for a while, right?
Kiyosaki acknowledges that, yeah. During that period of growth, it was a viable path, but he argues the whole economic game changed after 9/11. It's gotten much tougher for that average millionaire next door.
Tougher how? What are the obstacles now?
Well, think about wages not really keeping up with costs, right? The cost of living goes up,
Okay.
but paychecks often don't match. Plus, more volatility, more uncertainty in markets.
Mm.
And then he throws in this really provocative idea. He suggests there's this third group of people
Yeah.
who look at the massive national debt takeover. I think you mentioned $17 trillion back then, not as a disaster, but actually as an opportunity.
An opportunity? For what? A wealth transfer?
Kind of, yeah. The thinking is that big economic shifts, big disruptions, they create openings. For people who understand how to play the game, often, unfortunately, at the expense of those who don't really see what's happening.
And this ties into his worries about the dollar, right? Losing its value.
Directly, that's a huge theme, the shrinking purchasing power of the dollar.
He said, what, 95% loss in value over 100 years? That's staggering.
It really puts it in perspective.
And he even suggests it could go to zero. I mean, that sounds a bit extreme.
It does sound dramatic, yeah. But he uses history to make his point. Talks about the Continental Dollar, during the Revolutionary War, and the Confederate dollar. Both basically became worthless because they just printed too much. He points to German hyperinflation, too. His main message isn't necessarily predicting zero, but warning about the principle. If you keep printing money without restraint, serious devaluation can happen.
And the people who get hit hardest are the savers, the ones on fixed incomes.
Absolutely. If your money buys less and less, your savings just evaporate, practically. And this leads right into what he calls the cash heist.
The cash heist. Okay, that term again. What's being stolen and how?
He's arguing that what's being taken is your money's power, its purchasing power, the real value of your savings, your chance at real financial security.
How is it stolen?
Through this combination, he says. Inflation eats away at value. Taxes take a big bite out of what you earn. And crucially, a lack of financial education leaves most people unaware this is even happening.
So they don't know how the system works against them in a way.
Exactly. His point is, You need to understand these heists so you don't become a victim. You need to see the past to navigate the future.
He talks about taking a leap of faith himself. How does that fit in?
Well, that personal story is like a real-life example of stepping off the conventional path, doing something risky, like the financial strategies he promotes. He connects it back to Bucky Fuller's ideas about finding your purpose, needing to embrace uncertainty sometimes.
Right. Fuller comes up a lot. Kiyosaki mentions his principle. The more people I serve, the more effective I become. How did that influence Kiyosaki?
Oh, massively. That principle was apparently key in shifting his own business. From doing smaller seminars to finding ways to reach way more people.
It's like with the Rich Dad books and the games.
Exactly. That allowed him to serve millions, teach millions. And, not surprisingly, that amplified his success too. It shows that creating broad value can be a path to wealth.
Which challenges that stereotype of the rich just being greedy, right? He actually has a chapter called The Rich Are Generous.
He does. He confronts that head on. He argues, yeah, greed exists, obviously, but huge wealth can also come from being incredibly generous with the value you provide.
Like inventors or creators.
Precisely. People like Walt Disney, Henry Ford, Sergey Brin. He uses them as examples. Their creations helped millions, and that's what made them wealthy. He makes a clear line between that and just exploiting people.
Interesting. Then there's the genie within idea. Like everyone has some innate genius. What's the financial angle there?
The genie within is like a metaphor for your unique talents, your potential. Kiyosaki believes everyone's got something they're naturally good at. Finding that genius, developing it, and then figuring out how to use it to create value for others, that's a key path to financial success, in his view. But it takes work, effort to unlock it.
He also talks a lot about injustice. But not just social injustice, he focuses on the injustice of financial ignorance. What's he mean by that?
Yeah, that's a powerful framing. Drawing on his own experiences and seeing people struggle financially, regardless of background, he concluded that a really fundamental injustice is the lack of practical financial education.
So people are basically set up to fail, or at least struggle, because they just don't know the rules of the money game.
That's his argument. They're vulnerable to that cash heist because they lack the knowledge to see it, to understand how the system works, and importantly, how to make it work for them.
Which connects right back to the cash heist then. People losing ground without realizing why.
Precisely. He sees this lack of financial literacy as this huge hidden vulnerability. And then he starts getting into specifics like the power of the paycheck. But maybe not how you'd expect.
Right. Not as security, but as a potential trap. He quotes his rich dad saying something really strong, like the paycheck enslaves you.
Yeah, the person who signs the paycheck has the power to enslave another person's body, mind, and soul. It's intense.
What's the core point, though?
That relying only on a paycheck really limits your freedom, makes you dependent on your boss, on the economy, on being able to trade your time. And then immediately he connects this to the power of words. Words are tools.
Right, like changing "I can't afford it" to "how can I afford it?"
Exactly. Such a simple shift, but it changes everything, doesn't it? One is a dead end, the other opens up thinking, problem solving.
Yeah. It forces you to find solutions.
And that proactive mindset is what he says you need to break free from just depending on that paycheck, which naturally makes you question, well, where do you get your financial advice?
Good point. He warns against just listening to people who sell financial products, right?
Yeah.
Quoting Buffett on Wall Street.
Exactly. You have to consider the bias. Who benefits if you take their advice? It's a critical question.
And that skepticism extends even to schools. The heist of education. What's that about?
Well, he raises some big questions, like who decided what gets taught in schools? And is the system really designed to make people financially smart or just compliant workers?
He mentions Rockefeller and Carnegie, their influence on education. What's the concern there?
He brings up historical interpretations suggesting maybe these industrialists helped shape education to produce good factory workers. People good at following instructions rather than independent, financially savvy thinkers.
That's a provocative thought.
It is. And whether it's the whole story or not, he uses it to question if the focus on academics might have pushed practical financial skills aside.
Okay, let's dig into the mechanics of this heist. Fractional reserve banking. Can you break that down simply?
Sure. Imagine you deposit $10 in a bank. Okay.
Got it.
Under fractional reserve rules, the bank doesn't just hold your $10. They only have to keep a small fraction, maybe $1, in reserve. The rest, say $9, they can lend out.
Okay.
Now, the person who borrows that $9 probably deposits it in their bank. That bank keeps a fraction, lends out the rest, and this process repeats. More and more money gets created in the system than was actually deposited initially.
Right. I see how that creates more money, but how is that stealing wealth?
The link is inflation. When you create more money chasing the same amount of goods, what usually happens to prices?
They go up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So your original $10 now buys less. Its purchasing power has been eroded, diminished. That's the subtle heist on your savings. It just happens gradually.
Okay, that makes sense. Then he points to taxes as another heist.
Yeah, he talks about that 1943 Act, the Current Tax Payment Act. That's when withholdings started the government taking taxes directly from your paycheck before you even see it.
Uh-huh.
He quotes Fuller again, suggesting this made it easier for the rich, the GRUNCH, as Fuller called them, gross universal cash heist folks, to tap into the income of workers.
And bailouts. He mentions the Fed being created in secret, and things like the savings and loan crisis, where taxpayers paid the price.
Right. He sees those as examples where the system protects big players from their mistakes, but the average person ends up footing the bill. It reinforces his narrative of this ongoing heist.
Okay. And Nixon's policies, taking the dollar off gold, China trade, ERISA, and 401k. What's Kiyosaki's take on those?
Generally, he sees them as negative long-term for the average person, taking the dollar off gold. That removed a big check on printing money, potentially fueling inflation, opening trade with China, increased competition for jobs here, and 401ks, while presented as a benefit, shifted retirement risk onto individuals and the stock market. Less security, more volatility for people's futures.
He calls it the dark ages of financial ignorance. Quotes Jefferson warning about banks controlling currency. Does he think we're still in that?
Very much so. He argues that because most people don't understand finance, they're vulnerable. They're susceptible to these heists. The debates we still have about inflation, central banks, they show these issues are alive and well.
And technology replacing jobs. He uses Kodak's bankruptcy as an example.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Automation, digital disruption. These forces are changing the job market fast. Kodak failed to adapt, and he sees that as a warning. Traditional jobs might become less secure.
Which leads to this idea of the mystery of the invisible. Fuller's 99% invisible universe thing. How does that connect to money?
It's an analogy. Just like most of the universe's unseen forces, Kiyosaki suggests a lot of wealth creation and control happens in ways that aren't obvious. Complex financial instruments, strategies. The rich can operate in this invisible realm.
Hiding wealth, maybe. Widening the gap.
Potentially, yeah. And he also warns that just being angry at the rich stops you from actually understanding how they generate wealth. You get blinded by the anger.
He mentions the robber barons, too. Why bring them up?
As historical examples, right? People who build fortunes in the industrial age, sometimes using pretty rough tactics. He suggests that while the methods change, that underlying drive for wealth and control is still a powerful force today.
So who's to blame for all this inequality he describes?
Well, it's tempting to point fingers, isn't it? But Kiyosaki kind of suggests the bigger issue is this widespread inability to see these invisible forces, how finance works, how tech changes things. He pushes for understanding over blame.
Okay. Then there's ephemeralization. Doing more with less. How does that apply?
It's about efficiency, basically. Getting more output with fewer resources. Like a teacher using the internet to reach hundreds of students instead of just 30 in a classroom.
Ah, okay.
He thinks people and businesses who don't embrace that principle, who don't find ways to do more with less, will struggle in this new economy.
And he sounds a big alarm about derivatives, quoting Buffett calling them lethal.
Yeah, he echoes Buffett's concern there. Derivatives are complex contracts based on underlying assets.
Yeah.
It can be really opaque, hard to understand, and as we saw in 2008 with things like CDSs and CDOs.
The credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations?
Exactly. They can create huge risks in the whole system, seemingly invisible tools with devastating real-world impacts.
Which brings us back to something more tangible. Good debt versus bad debt. How does he define that? It's crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial to his thinking. Good debt for him is debt that makes you money, like borrowing to buy a rental property that generates positive cash flow each month.
Okay, and bad debt?
Bad debt takes money from you. Like often the mortgage on your own home, if it's just an expense, sucking money out each month. That's why he says, controversially, your house is not an asset for many people.
Right. If it's not producing income, then he links leverage to that doing more with less idea. How do you get leverage?
Well, an employee has limited leverage, right? Trading time for money. But an entrepreneur can leverage other people's time, money, skills. They build systems. Asking for a raise isn't really leverage in his view.
It's not doing more with less.
Exactly. Real leverage is creating something that scales, that produces more without you having to put in proportionally more effort.
He also stresses understanding the different types of income. This seems really important for taxes.
Hugely important. He breaks it down into three main types. Ordinary income, that's your salary, interest, most retirement withdrawals. Tax the highest.
Okay.
Then portfolio income.
Yeah.
Capital gains, like selling stock for a profit. Tax generally lower than ordinary.
And the third?
Passive income. That's cash flow from assets you own, rental properties, business income you don't actively work for day to day. This often gets the best tax treatment.
So the rich focus on passive income, using debt to buy assets and pay less tax.
That's the strategy he outlines, yes. Using debt strategically to acquire income-producing assets that generate passive income, which is taxed favorably.
Which leads to his whole idea that real financial education is the opposite of traditional wisdom. It's not just saving, it's about expanding your means.
Precisely. Shift from scarcity to abundance. Learn how money really works. Make it work for you. Don't just try to live below potentially limited means. He contrasts his poor dad's advice, get a job, with his rich dad's invest in assets.
And the financial statements look totally different, right? Employee versus asset owner.
Completely. The employee focuses on the paycheck coming in and expenses going out. The asset owner focuses on building that asset column, making it generate cash flow. And he really favors tangible assets like real estate here.
Why real estate specifically?
Control, he argues. Equally good debt and significant tax advantages. Often more stable than paper assets, too.
And he believes you learn this stuff by doing, even by making mistakes. Not like school where mistakes are bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He talks about practicing analyzing deals even if you don't buy, using simulations like his cash A-flow game. It's about making mistakes where it doesn't cost you real money, so you learn for the real world. It's about building financial intelligence through practice.
Wow. Okay, then he brings up Admiral Mullen's point about national debt and K-12 education being national security threats. That's heavy.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Connects economic health and education directly to the nation's security and future. Mullen was likely worried about needing a financially literate population to keep the country strong.
And Gardner's multiple intelligences theory, how does that fit?
It reinforces his criticism of standard education. If schools only value certain types of intelligence, like logical or verbal, what about kids whose genius lies elsewhere, kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal?
Right, the one-size-fits-all problem.
Exactly. He also mentioned physical, mental, and emotional intelligence, saying emotional intelligence handling life's ups and downs is key for success.
So how do you find your genius? Back to Fuller.
Yeah, Fuller's God is a verb, not a noun, meaning you find it by doing, by trying things, taking action, making mistakes. Fuller apparently suggested finding something the world needs done and figuring out your own way to do it.
And for practical steps, Kiyosaki suggests starting a part-time business, an incubator.
Right. Keep your day job for security, but start something on the side to learn. Learn how a whole business works, not just one specialized skill like school teaches. He uses his BI triangle model for this.
The 8 integrities of a business.
Yeah, the components needed for a successful asset. Building a business forces you to learn about all of them, making you a generalist, not just a specialist.
And he circles back to tech replacing jobs again, even pilots. It really drives home the need for different income streams.
It does. The landscape is changing. Relying solely on our traditional job looks increasingly risky.
Then the national debt issue again, but adding to off-balance sheet stuff. Social Security, Medicare liabilities, makes the picture look even worse.
Yeah, he points out the official debt is only part of the story. When you add those future obligations, the U.S. looks potentially bankrupt by standard accounting. It's a serious long-term concern.
But then he talks about trust, gold and silver as tangible trust.
Contrasting it with fiat currency, yeah. In God we trust on the dollar, but can you really trust paper money long-term? Gold, historically, is seen by some as trustworthy, real money. Silver has industrial uses too, potentially making it even more valuable. He notes Forbes advocated for gold standard return.
So it's a debate about what real value is.
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
Which leads him back to the individual needing to learn the language of money, financial vocabulary.
Like learning French or Spanish, but for finance.
Exactly. Knowing the terms assets versus liabilities, cash flow versus capital gains, reduces risk, increases trust in your own understanding, boosts rewards.
And understanding the quadrants, SVSB, self-employed versus business owner.
Crucial difference. The S works for money, often harder than an employee. The B owns a system that makes money. Like the McDonald's example, Ray Kroc realized he wasn't in the hamburger business, but the real estate business.
Owning the system, not just working in it.
That's the goal for B quadrant. And again, he hammers home. Words matter. Assets, liabilities, cash flow. These words can make you rich or poor depending on how you understand and use them.
Finally, he brings in Fuller's vision of emergency and emergence, a crisis marking a shift from industrial to information age.
Yeah, Fuller predicted this big transition period. He saw crisis, emergency, not just as bad, but as necessary for emergence, like a chick breaking out of its shell to reach a new level.
But he warned against sticking to old ways.
Definitely. Warned against complacency, against the old guard resisting change. It's a call to adapt, to embrace the new era proactively.
So wrapping up this deep dive into the second chance, we've hit on this cash heist idea, wealth being eroded by inflation, taxes, lack of knowledge, the huge importance of financial education to even see what's happening.
Right. And questioning that conventional wisdom house is asset, savers win, job security is everything. Looking at different income types, assets, using debt smartly.
And adapting to this changing world with technology shifting everything. Kiyosaki really pushes a different way of thinking about money, doesn't he? Urging you to be critical, take control.
He absolutely does. And maybe that final thought from Fuller is the most powerful. That humanity is at this crossroads, this choice point, based on how we handle this huge shift. Financial literacy, Kiyosaki argues, is maybe the most vital tool you have to make that choice well.
So maybe the question for you, the listener, is what could a second chance look like in your financial understanding? What steps could you take starting now to navigate this changing economy more effectively? Something to think about.